From now until the spring of 2021, older adults in Tennessee will have improved access to legal services for civil legal issues. In the next half hour, we're going to explore what that will look like across the state. We'll talk about some of the legal resources that exist for older adults and learn about key rights older adults have through the law. As a disclaimer, the following discussion is meant to provide general information and is not intended to serve as legal advice. If you have a civil legal concern, you should contact a lawyer who can provide you individually tailored legal advice. We'll be providing information so you can see if you're eligible to receive services in Tennessee. Here to offer their perspective are Sonia Belafont, Director of the Tennessee Senior Law Alliance, Chris Coleman, Staff Attorney at the Tennessee Justice Center, Liz Todaro, Access to Justice Director at the Tennessee Bar Association, and Ann Pruitt, Executive Director of the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services. Thanks for joining us. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what this 3-year grant is meant to achieve. How did it happen?
Elder Trust is a settlement of claims that involved unfair pricing in the sale of some nursing homes to Tennessee nonprofits.
Okay.
So it was about $40 million. $5 million of it went to address some immediate needs, and about $35 million of it has been put aside, as you said, to be used over 3 years, and it's intended to address 4 critical issues: housing, dental care, transportation, and legal services. So Tennessee Senior Law Alliance is the legal service provider under the grant.
And just for full disclosure, Nashville Public Television also received some funding from Elder Trust for our work both on dental and legal issues for older adults. So let's talk a little bit about who's eligible for sort of this improved access to legal services in Tennessee.
It's specifically available to seniors who are 6 years of age or older. That's really the only requirement.
I know in some cases Legal Services Corporation lawyers have had sort of financial restrictions on who they can provide free services to. There's not exactly a financial limitation on this service, is that correct?
That's a good point. Yes, you're correct. Generally, legal service corporations do have some income eligibility requirements, but for purposes of the Tennessee Senior Law Alliance, no, that's not one of the requirements under this particular resource.
But you are focused on vulnerable adults in Tennessee. Talk about what does that mean?
That's correct. We prioritize individuals who are lower income and who may not have ready access to legal services. They are, of course, one of the most vulnerable populations that exist, and we, of course, would like to assist them as much as possible.
In the documentary, we talk a little bit, we see sort of legal services lawyers going out and doing a lot of educational opportunities for folks. And again, those are anybody can go to those, and afterwards, anybody can talk to a lawyer there about maybe seeing, if they have an issue that might need some sort of support from an attorney. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's a good point. Outreach has to not only target, of course, the seniors under the funding source for Tennessee Senior Law Alliance, but many times the caregivers or providers or loved ones that are going to come into contact with the senior, particularly when a senior is at home and shut in, so they may not have ready access to come out, for instance, and go to the senior center or wherever the outreach may be occurring.
Right.
We want to make sure those resources are getting to the home, particularly, for instance, in rural communities where that senior resides.
All right, and but this sort of grant is more than just about direct legal services. It's about creating a coordinated network, and I think each of your organizations kind of has a part to play in that. Let's talk a little bit about each of those. For instance, Liz, talk about the Tennessee Bar Association and what y'all are trying to do.
Sure. Well, fortunately in Tennessee, we have an amazing legal services community. It's very diverse, it's statewide. And the Tennessee Bar Association is actually the largest professional organization in Tennessee. And so we have attorney members across the state. And so we communicate with them about programs and projects that are going on. So the first thing we want to do is we're helping to raise awareness with attorneys across the state about the project. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is they may want to be able to do outreach projects or support those outreach programs. They also are really needed to do pro bono work. So once those individuals are connecting with the services and they're going to a clinic or they need representation, we want to be able to provide enough pro bono attorneys to do that. So we help connect them. We also do education with our membership. So we have, again, attorneys that practice in all areas, and we want to really highlight that the issues of older Tennesseans really touch on all of those areas. It's not just elder law or estate planning, but it's family law, it's administrative law, it's local government. All of those really need to be aware of the issues. So that's sort of the role that we're playing.
So, y'all are kind of doing educational work with the legal community. And Ann, talk a little bit about, y'all are maybe doing more education to the general public, correct?
Both. So I think TALS is a statewide nonprofit, and I think of us like the glue that binds together all the organizations that are working on civil justice as well as individuals. And we're bound together around a common value of fairness. Legal help should not be accessible only to people who can afford to hire a lawyer when they have a problem. That's where our alliance comes into play.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about specifically the resources that y'all are either creating or improving through this grant.
So one of the things we are all trying to do is simplify the search for legal help. And a big priority of TALS is a helpline that was started in 2013 and is expanding in a big way to serve seniors under this Elder Trust grant. So we talk to about 5,000 Tennesseans a year. It's 1-844-HELP, the number 4, TN. And what happens when you call is a Tennessee lawyer answers the phone, we triage the issue, because often the issue that you're feeling the most urgency about may not be the real root of the problem. So we're going to talk to the caller and figure out what's going on. We're going to give some basic legal advice. And then we have the ability to refer to any of the people sitting in this room and many who are not, a large group of providers. We can also tell people when the next legal clinic is in their county and tell them what documents to bring. We can tell them to look at www.helpfortn.org, which is the companion portal. And there you can click to email a lawyer. There's 600 Tennessee lawyers, members of the Tennessee Bar, who are volunteering to answer questions online for free. We have videos about what to expect in court and booklets, so there's a whole lot of resources that are available online, and we're kind of the entry point when you need help and you don't know where to turn.
So it seems like, people are recognizing there are unique set of needs. There's a unique set of needs for older adults in Tennessee. And Chris, talk a little bit about the Tennessee Justice Center and what y'all are trying to focus your work on for older adults. You've continued to be working in this area, right?
Right. TJC is not funded by the Legal Services Corporation. Most legal aid offices get federal funding, and that funding comes with restrictions on the types of cases they can take, the types of people they can present, the types of advocacy they can do. TJC doesn't take that funding, so we're not bound by those restrictions, which we feel like is filling a gap that allows us to do more systemic advocacy. So we're trying to identify systemic problems that affect older Tennesseans in their ability to access health care, long-term care, nutrition assistance, and if we need to do things that legal aid can't do, like a class action lawsuit or lobbying, things like that to change a law. We try to fill that role to make sure that we're not just helping one person, we're helping everybody with the same problem.
So we learned that this opportunity has created a lot of outreach that maybe wasn't happening at the same level prior to this grant. The purpose of this grant was to serve sort of 6 core legal areas of legal need. They cover benefits, health care, housing, consumer law, as well as prevention of elder abuse and planning documents, correct?
Correct.
And I'm kind of curious about, with all of the outreach that you're doing, are you finding that those really are kind of the 6, the core areas of legal need? Are you finding new areas that you hadn't expected? Talk a little bit about just what you're learning through this outreach process.
That's actually a good question. I think we are finding some areas that we didn't expect to encounter when we're talking about individuals 60 years of age or older. For instance, in some instances, we've had situations where seniors contacted us regarding a student loan. Either they've co-signed on one or they had one, and now that they're in their 60s, there are some issues with meeting those financial obligations. We've also had some situations where we've had seniors contact us concerning what their needs are on a family law perspective, either with regard to grandchildren and how they can assist either with adoption or what their options are with regard to caring for a grandchild that they didn't expect to be raising in their 60s. But I'd also like to say, one thing you can say about what we do in serving the civil needs of the low income is that you really can't predict what's going to be coming to your desk. And so you have to be receptive to a holistic approach to whatever the legal issue is and digging a little bit deeper. And there's no telling what you're going to uncover in those instances.
And it's rarely one issue. You're right, Sonia. And the cool thing about this grant is before Elder Trust, we kind of worked in silos, and everybody addressed the issues that were pressing in their particular service area. That meant a senior in Lake County or Grundy County may not get the same level of service that somebody in Davidson County would get.
Exactly.
So this grant allowed us to build capacity in all firms to be able to handle those 6 core issues in addition to the specialty issues that may happen in their area. So it's huge for us.
You know, I want to take a moment and kind of look at maybe some of the rights that older adults do have, or some of the legal rights that have become really important across the state. And the first one I want to look at is about a case that was related to the Americans with Disability Act, so Olmstead. So let's take a look at that, Roland, and then we'll kind of talk about what that means for older adults in Tennessee.
We know seniors want to live at home. They want to live in their communities. They want to live near family and friends and their networks. What many of them probably don't know is there's actually a Supreme Court decision called Olmstead that requires they have access to the ability to live independently and to live at home. 20 years ago, there was this landmark case, we call it the Olmstead case. It was in the Supreme Court, and it created this right to receive care and services in your community. And it was the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's the law that we rely on constantly to make sure that our seniors don't have to age in isolation, that they don't have to be housed in places where they don't have access to the community. And it continues to influence the built environment and the way that places are built. It influences the access to services and people's ability to age at home and age in place. So knowing how to utilize that law, knowing how to reference it, knowing how to really robustly defend it is a critical part of the work that we do and the work that we're trying to do to train lawyers to protect that right that Olmstead created.
So Chris, y'all deal a lot with long-term care related issues that I would assume are kind of, have at their foundation that right that Olmstead created. Talk a little bit about what that looks like in your work.
Usually there are different programs, some to allow you to stay at home, some to provide you with nursing home care. What you run into often is the structure of the rules push people toward nursing homes, and we try to push back to say, no, there have to be reasonable accommodations made in the rules of the TennCare program, which funds a lot of this, to make sure that people can exercise this right to live in their community, to live in the most integrated setting that's appropriate to their needs. And so we're constantly challenging rules that we feel like needlessly bias toward institutionalization.
Liz, talk a little bit about, it seems like Olmstead is something that anybody who's working in elder law would already know about or need to know about. Is this the kind of thing that you're trying to educate lawyers about what a case like this means for their practice and the people that they're serving?
In the practice of law, a lot of people get very specialized. And so they may feel like or not recognize that Olmstead or other cases have any relevance to their practice. So we do try to use our tools of education, both in our continuing legal education and annual forums, to be sure people are updated on the most recent developments and things that may be relevant to them. And we also have, it sounds very simple, but we have a daily newsletter, e-newsletter that goes out to all of our 12,000 members, and it has news articles and just snippets so that people can touch in and realize, okay, this is either a new development or this is something that is relevant to clients I may serve. And we also have all listing of all the recent Tennessee cases and appellate cases. So it's sort of a snapshot for people who may be specialized in one area to learn about other areas. We also have our Bar Journal, which we have articles regularly about elder law issues or about how certain areas of law may be affected by that, and we actually have a regular column that focuses specifically on elder law issues. So I think all of that is a way for, even if someone doesn't practice in this area, they can dip in and realize what the current law is.
There's a comment in the documentary that one of the legal aid lawyers makes about rights and benefits, that you think benefits are going to be easy and you think you're going to have rights to these things, but you end up having to fight for them. And you kind of wonder, something like, Supreme Court decisions change, rights change. Is that something that you're also having to constantly sort of consider?
we are always having to fight to defend rights that have been already declared by the Supreme Court. And even when they declare a right in one area, and you think it's going to cover lots of, broadly cover the landscape, each different area is going to be a new fight about, okay, what did Olmstead really mean here? Because Olmstead was a single case on a single set of facts. It declared that needlessly institutionalizing someone was a form of discrimination on the basis of disability. But that's a lofty vision that often, when you get down to the brass tacks of, okay, can a state Medicaid program set caps based on the cost of institutionalization so you can't get enough home care?
Right.
It's amazing the ways that law can morph and change in different factual settings.
Let's look at one more case. This is Goldberg v. Kelly, a decision that came down in 1970 and impacts sort of benefits and due process.
Goldberg v. Kelly is the hallmark of due process rights with regard to public benefits. That was the case where it said individuals who are applying for public benefits have a right to due process. They have a right to notice. They have a right to hearing. They have a right to have a lawyer, not provided to them, but a lawyer present at that hearing. So there's a whole litany of due process rights which are so important to when someone's applying for public benefits and are denied, either denied their full right or denied outright. I think what's really important for attorneys who are working with older adults are to understand the benefits programs, to understand Medicare and Medicaid in particular. Lawyers can use that experience, and it's important that they use that experience to inform public policy and to improve the system, because there aren't enough legal resources to fix the problem. And if we can identify a specific issue or more than one specific issue, then we should fix it for all.
So, I'm just thinking about an individual's case, like how could a due process issue become a legal issue for someone, if they've run into a problem?
Generally, the way we see these problems occur is an applicant may have been denied a benefit, and they're not aware that there's an appeal process, and how to exercise their rights under that appeal process, and how to advocate for themselves, or in some cases, if they can't, how they can find an attorney who can help them navigate through that process so they can ensure that they're getting what they're entitled to under due process.
And Chris, talk a little bit about what, again, due process for you all. This is maybe where you're looking for glitches, problems in the system that are affecting a lot of people, perhaps?
People applying for the long-term care program, the Choices program through TennCare, there are lots of notices involved. And Goldberg and your due process rights require the state to provide you with, if they're going to deny you a benefit, they have to provide you a clear notice of why they're doing that. But often there are multiple notices. It's very confusing. One will say you're eligible, another will say you're not eligible. All of those are due process violations, and we're trying to make sure that everybody's right to, say, a long-term care benefit, that they have the right to get that benefit if they're eligible without needless red tape, without endless paperwork that's not required to determine their eligibility. All those are due process violations, and we need to make sure that people are aware of those rights and using the appeal process if they think TennCare made a mistake, things like that.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about some rights, we've talked a little bit about some resources. When should people be calling a lawyer? How do you know if you have a legal issue? That seems like a huge area of need in and of itself, is identifying when you have a legal problem that might, necessitate a lawyer.
A huge red flag is when you receive one of those notices and they tell you that you can contact one of the legal aid offices. And I can tell you, as a director of the Tennessee Senior Law Alliance, that should be any one of the legal aid offices: West Tennessee, Legal Aid of East Tennessee, and even Memphis Area Legal Services, and of course Legal Aid Society of Middle Tennessee. But that's pretty glaring. It's the other situations that many people aren't aware. For instance, the debt collectors, when they get the robocalls. And so I would suggest, personally, I always tell applicants, I would rather that I get a call from someone who's proactively trying to address something than trying to react to, for instance, notice that you're being sued.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, and maybe insert planning into this conversation. You know, there are certain legal issues, you know, legal documents even, that maybe everyone should have. I mean, and if that's the case, then I guess in some ways we should all be contacting a lawyer or thinking about these things. Talk a little bit about planning documents in particular, powers of attorney, advance directives, living wills, those kinds of things, why, you know, people need to have them and how they can get them.
We're talking about the older individuals that we are expanding capacity for under this funding. It's important to remember that before you get into a situation where there's a health challenge and you can't execute a document like a durable power of attorney or an advanced health care directive or even a will, that you have these documents in place so that you can, one, have some peace of mind knowing that you have empowered yourself and selected someone that you trust to handle your financial affairs or making medical decisions for you before you get into a situation potentially where you don't have the capacity to sign that contract anymore, and you could potentially expose yourself to being exploited either financially or physically by someone that you're not aware of or that you don't have a trust base in.
There's sometimes online resources that you do a search for a document and it's like, this, you know, online resource will help you create a living will, just pay us a certain amount of money. And I wonder, like, are those resources that people should maybe you know, is an option for people to use, or are there challenges involved in that people may not be aware of? Are those kinds of documents accepted in a place like Tennessee? Talk a little bit about that.
We are all about online resources, but we want them to be reliable resources. That's why I'm super appreciative of our Supreme Court and the Access to Justice Commission that has created court-approved forms. So they're a set of forms that you can go online and find, and if you use them, then they'll be accepted. And then there's a whole lot out there that may not be accepted, and so I hate it when I get a call from somebody and they've paid money for something that's not good. So speaking of planning, my kind of rule of thumb is anytime you're experiencing a life change, that's a good time to check in.
What life change, what does that mean? You know.
So birth, death, getting ready to buy a house, having money problems and thinking about taking out a loan.
Getting married, getting divorced.
Yeah, just all of those. So it's, you know, every 5 years there's probably something going on, and I'm excited to tell you about one more resource. It's a legal wellness checkup, and it's a great thing to do when you're not in a crisis. It's quick, it's online on our web portal, and it's like going to your internist for a physical. It just asks you questions about money, family, all the aspects of your life, and at the end a report prints out that tells you what your legal risk areas are and connects you to the local resources that can help. So that I consider a planning tool too, preventively.
You know, one of the things that we didn't talk a lot about in the documentary, but seems like it's certainly one of the core areas of legal need is housing. How do housing issues come up for older adults typically? What are some of the concerns that you're seeing across the state?
In my experience, I've had seniors contact us, and they may have had, for instance, a medical emergency which made them act out of character, and they received notices that their housing is being terminated. Oftentimes it may be HUD subsidized housing, and so there are some regs that they're required to adhere to. And we were able to apply and inform the landlord of the ADA and the requirements and to get an accommodation so that she could or he could retain their housing and be able to age with dignity and in place.
You're saying an eviction notice of some kind.
That's correct.
And that there might be some thought that that was unfair or that there is some recourse there, I guess?
Well, I think what we're looking at in this instance, I was referencing a reasonable accommodation. And I think for the seniors as they age in place, there may be a need to do just that. The other thing we're seeing is that there may be a question as to whether or not the senior can continue to live independently, and that's also something that should be addressed under the ADA and a reasonable accommodation.
Housing is, for older Tennesseans, is really inseparable from long-term care. You know,
right.
The question of, are you going to be eligible? And one thing that scares many people off is what's going to happen to your house after you die. There is a federal requirement for state Medicaid programs to do what's called a state recovery, to try to get back some of the money they've spent. that scares many people off from seeking benefits they're eligible for. So it's important for people to know there are lots of exceptions to this. If you've got a spouse or a child still living in the house, there are could be ways to not lose the most valuable asset you have when you die.
You know, this is a 3-year project. You're 1 year in. You're seeing a lot of new and emerging issues. What are you hoping to achieve in this 3-year period, and what happens when the grant is complete?
We are, big picture, improving the quality of lives of seniors. For us, one of the huge takeaways is the collective impact of this funding. So it's not just legal services. Now we're partnering with dental, transportation, and housing partners so that when we see a legal issue, we can also spot the other holistic issues and vice versa. So we were creating a network that did not exist before, relationships that did not exist before, and that will continue even after the funding.
And for folks who are wondering if they're eligible, wondering if a loved one is eligible, what do they need to do to sort of take advantage while this grant period is still running?
Contact any of the service providers under this funding source, any of the legal aid, civil legal aid firms across the state.
What about afterwards, you know, when the grant ends, trying to continue this effort, right? What are y'all thinking with that?
Well, I think Ann mentioned the relationships that we're building and engaging more people with this issue. And I know for the role of the private bar and just the attorneys of the Tennessee Bar Association, about half of Tennessee attorneys do pro bono, report doing pro bono right now. And so 2 things. One is we want to be sure that those that are doing it are having a meaningful experience and continue, but we also want to engage that other half that maybe hasn't found the right match of what sort of pro bono opportunity to do. So it's through this sort of outreach and being paired with these cases, the long term, perhaps some of those attorneys can help carry the load of that long-term pro bono need.
And the need's not going away. I mean, right? So I mean, talk a little bit about, like, you know, from what you're learning, what you're hearing, looking out 5, 10 years down the road, you know, what do you want, what do we need in Tennessee to meet the legal needs of older adults?
I think that we need to continue to expand the access to civil legal assistance across the state. The need and the demand can be overwhelming and can be ever increasing. So any opportunity we get to give access to these resources, that's what we need to be looking at doing and just expanding it on an ongoing basis.
Well, we've run out of time. I want to thank each of our panelists for joining us and for you tuning into this conversation. For more information and to see all of Nashville Public Television's Aging Matters series, visit our website at WMPT.org/agingmatters. Thanks for watching.